Our video focuses on the transnational cocaine trade emanating from Latin America. The most prominent players being Mexican transnational criminal organizations such as the Sinaloa Cartel and the CJNG. These illegal cartels are involved in a wide range of illicit activities such as arms trafficking, human smuggling, corruption, and so-called narco-terrorism. But in line with the title of our video, this short educational piece will focus specifically on drug trafficking, including the most prominent drug for Mexican cartels, the plant-based cocaine. The aim of our research is to describe the path of the drug in the Western world and to highlight the complexity, intricacy, and transnational links of the drug trade. We have used a number of sources to diversify the information, but we would like to highlight three in particular, the study of which can provide a much more comprehensive picture of the workings of criminal organizations and the distribution, quantities, and dangers of narcotics. These flagship documents are the 2020 National Drug Threat Assessment published by the Drug Enforcement Administration in 2021. The World Drug Report 2021 and 2022 published by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, and finally the Serious Organized Crime Threat Assessment 2021 published by the European Police Office in 2021.
FBI, open up!
Mexico is experiencing a serious conflict that has claimed more than 360,000 lives since 2006 and has left about 26,000 people missing over the past decade and a half. The war on drugs between the cartels and the central government, which has been going on for more than 15 years, shows no sign of ending in the near future. Mexico is a large country covering 2 million square kilometers, made up of many different landscapes. Governing and controlling remote territories is never an easy task, but in the case of Mexico, this is further complicated by geographical factors. In the North deserts dot the states of Baja California, Sonora, and Chihuahua along the US-Mexico border. The central part of the country is mountainous, covering 70% of the country's territory. Mexico City is located in the center of the country, and like in Cairo and Tokyo, the capital is the economic, infrastructural, cultural, and political center of the country. It is in fact the only such center in Mexico, which is a problem for a country of this size. The southern areas of the country are made up of dense jungles and swamps, which have been an excellent base area for military leftist or separatist guerrillas throughout the country's history. You can see that the country is very geographically fragmented, which makes it understandable that such a country's history has been a struggle between centralization and decentralization of power in the periphery. Mexico's society reflects the country's fragmentation. According to CIA data, 41.9% of the population live in extreme poverty, a huge figure for a country of more than 129 million people. Social disparities are strongly indicated by the fact that the bottom 10% own 2% of all household income, while the top 10% own 40%. The concentration of wealth in a few hands is not new in Mexico. Clientelism is a dominant shaping force in the region. Therefore, political problems that still exist today, such as corruption and weaknesses in the central power of the government, can be traced back to this legacy. This is important to mention and emphasize because if we accept the fact that the financial capital of the criminal organizations and cartels operating in the country is enormous, it is not surprising that the cartels have completely infiltrated politics. The indirect effect of this is that they can influence decision-making in the fight against organized crime or in the way it is fought, which raises further concerns. Mexican involvement and participation in the international drug trade can be traced back to the 19th century. It is an interesting fact that the development of organized, large-scale drug trafficking in the modern world can be linked to the imperialist powers. By the 18th century, the British East India Company, which had grown enormously in strength, became aware that Portugal was profiting heavily from the opium trade through the port cities of the Chinese colony. The company was keen to get in on this highly profitable business, so British India, which had the perfect climate and environment for growing poppies but not cotton, began producing vast quantities of opium, which the British shipped directly to Chinese ports and sold. This drug trade and its epidemic consequence of millions of drug addicts in China paved the way for the global spread of the drug. It can be said that one of the world's biggest drug traffickers was the British Royal Navy. By the end of the 19th century, the popularity of opium caves was a problem for the United States of America, and in 1909 the Shanghai Opium Commission was formed at the initiative of the then US President Theodore Roosevelt. Although the original aim of the commission was not to adopt provisions prohibiting the opium trade, it helped to bring about the Hague Opium Convention, signed just 3 years later in 1912, which brought the regulation of the drug trade into international law. By this time, however, the demand for drugs in the New World had grown enormously, and the supply was quickly being filled by none other than the Chinese. The Triads quickly realized that Mexico had the perfect climate for poppy cultivation and the infrastructure to transport it to the US. The first routes were established by Chinese opium smugglers along the west coast of Mexico to the US border. In the early years of the 20th century, the United States of America faced a serious problem with the drug epidemic sweeping the country, particularly in the southern states. Violent gang warfare also accompanied the narco trade. Hence the Harrison Act of 1914, which became a model of anti-drug policy for many countries of the world, banned drug use in all areas. Both medicinal and recreational use was banned. Washington used strong rhetoric to pressure the Mexican government to do likewise in the drugs field. However, by this time, Mexico had already been racked by the Mexican Revolution for 4 years, which lasted from 1910 to 1917. So it is fair to say that drug control was not a priority for the country's leadership. In this situation, all narcotics were criminalized on one side of the border and none on the other, which allowed the black market to flourish and smuggling to be extremely profitable. In Mexico, marijuana was criminalized in 1920 and opium in 1926. This process and business was controlled by the Chinese mafia until the end of Prohibition in 1933, during which time opium was the dominant narcotic. After Prohibition, however, Mexican bootleggers, then out of work, cracked down on the Triads and took over the trade. Many sources describe this takeover as part of a wave of hate crimes directed specifically against the Chinese, with many innocent souls falling victim. Drug trafficking organizations are undergoing constant change and transformation, constantly adapting to the market. Rival cartels, national and international law enforcement, but in Mexico, 3 major events with strong impact stand out. Mexican cartels have existed and been involved in illicit trade for decades, but their role has increased since the early 1990s. Following the dismantling of the previously dominant Colombian criminal organizations like the notorious Medellin cartel led by Pablo Escobar. From roles that had previously been limited to transporting, Mexicans have become distributors. By the 1980s, Mexican criminal organizations had merged into a large cartel, the Guadalajara cartel led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. The cartel flourished during the 1980s, profiting mainly from the illegal trade in cocaine, opium, and marijuana. The cartel continued to operate until 1989. Its breakup was partly caused by the torture and murder of a United States DEA agent, Enrique Kiki Camarena, which put pressure on Mexican organizations from the United States. After its dissolution, it was replaced by 4 main organizations: the Juarez, the Tijuana, the Sinaloa, and the Gulf cartels. The war on drugs declared by Mexican President Felipe Calderón in 2006 led to a bloody conflict between the cartels and the government forces, as well as the cartels themselves, which has continued ever since. The government in Mexico City stopped official reporting on the body count in early 2014, but the estimated numbers are ranging between 200,000 and 360,000. Government operations to dismantle the cartel leadership have increased instability between the groups, leading to greater violence. Over the following years, Mexico's larger and relatively more stable drug trafficking criminal organizations fragmented, with first 7 and then 9 major cartels forming. The law enforcement model begun by Calderon was continued by his successor government. Under the presidency of Enrique Pena Nieto, the violent crackdown on cartels continued, almost completely replicating and continuing the Calderon model. But this only increased the violence and the further fragmentation of criminal organizations in Mexico. By some estimates, at the end of his 6-year term, 300 groups were also fighting each other and government forces. The current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, began his 6-year term in 2018, and one of the main elements of his campaign has been to eradicate the militarized form of organized crime by taking soldiers off the streets. Despite this, the first 2 years of Obrador's presidency have resulted in the bloodiest years of the war on drugs. The government has continued to rely heavily on the military, not only in law enforcement but also in other areas such as infrastructure development and the development of telecommunications networks. This is due to the fact that the Mexican population considers the armed forces to be the least corrupt state employees, making it convenient for the government to have the military carry out crucial projects. In addition to keeping the military on the streets, the current government has created the National Guard, a significant number of whose members have been transferred from the armed forces. It can be seen that the military and the gendarmerie, which had played the lion's share of internal security tasks, have been supplemented by a new police-military organization. In Mexico, the militarized war on drugs has produced mixed results in the more than 15 years since it began. With the astronomical amount of money generated by the international drug trade, Mexican criminal organizations have vastly increased corruption within the state, creating further tensions and conflicts between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. In addition, fragmentation within criminal organizations has increased violence and diversified sources of income, such as arms trafficking, human smuggling, extortion, kidnapping, or illegal mining. The fragmentation of cartels has led to the disintegration of criminal organizations, which in previous years had been dominant on an international scale, into smaller, looser power groups as a consequence of militarized law enforcement, and to a reduction in their influence in the international drug trade. Despite the fragmentation, Mexico still has major drug trafficking criminal organizations: Sinaloa Cartel, CJNG, Gulf Cartel, and the Juarez Cartel. Their main networks and routes remain in place around the world, and they continue to play a dominant role in the drug supply chain. But the outsourcing of these criminal organizations in their target countries is not such that their activities are significant either in North America or in Europe. Their role is more focused on liaising with local criminal organizations such as the Italian 'Ndrangheta, the Camorra, or the American Barrio Azteca. The illicit activities of the Mexican cartels continue to focus on international drug trafficking. According to the DEA, Mexican criminal organizations make billions of dollars in profits annually from drug shipments to the United States alone. But their illegal activities have a much more diversified business model. Among the many other sources of revenue are oil theft, illegal logging, human trafficking, illegal arms trafficking, kidnapping, and extortion. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, cocaine is a highly addictive stimulant drug made from the leaves of the coca bush, native to South America. Although it can be used by healthcare providers for valid medical purposes, such as local anesthesia for certain surgeries, recreational use of cocaine is illegal. As the street drug, cocaine appears as a fine, white, crystalline powder. People snort the cocaine powder through their nose or rub it into their gums. Others dissolve the powder and inject it into their bloodstream. Some people inject a combination of cocaine and heroin called a speedball. Cocaine increases levels of the natural chemical messenger dopamine in brain circuits involved in controlling movement and reward. The short-term health effects of cocaine include extreme happiness and energy. Today, coca bush production continues to reach record highs. Its main origin in the Andean region of South America, according to UN data. This is the source of almost all the world's coca bush used in cocaine production. The three main coca-producing countries in the region are Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. The latter is currently the largest producer according to the UN 2021 report. Total global land used for coca cultivation has reached 234,200 hectares, of which 54,700 hectares are in Peru, 25,500 hectares are in Bolivia, and more than 150,000 hectares are in Colombia. With pure cocaine produced locally at 1,784 tons per year. According to the DEA, the figure is as high as 1,886 tons, and the land used is estimated to be much higher at approximately 326,180 hectares. In Colombia, the main production areas, according to the UN document, are the departments of Norte de Santander, Putumayo, Nariño, Cauca, and Antioquia, where the sparsely populated jungle provides excellent opportunities for illegal activities such as drug production. In Bolivia, coca bush production is more centralized than in Peru or Colombia, with the department of Santa Cruz being affected. The production and transportation of cocaine grown and produced in the Andes to Central America is controlled by transnational criminal networks in Colombia, while the lion's share of smuggling and trafficking to the US is now coordinated by Mexican cartels. These cartels work closely with the South American criminal organizations, in most cases sending representatives to liaise with the producers with whom they organize the transport. However, this is not a sign that Mexican criminal organizations are taking control of the Colombian drug trade, but rather that Colombian transnational criminal organizations have fragmented, which could lead to a stagnation of cocaine shipments to Mexico and a loss of profits for the cartels. Most cocaine entering the United States passes through one or more transit countries before entering the United States. Less than 1% of the cocaine seized came directly to the United States from South America, according to DEA documents. The primary routes for narco-traficantes originate from Colombian ports, such as Buenaventura. Their route leads through the Eastern Pacific, which smugglers traverse in light and fast small boats. According to the U.S. National Drug Threat Assessment document, approximately 74% of the cocaine entering the country enters North America via its route. The remaining 26% is distributed throughout the Caribbean Sea. 16% travels through the Western Caribbean, primarily via Honduras and Nicaragua, and 8% sails through the Caribbean corridor, with Puerto Rico as a primary stop. It is predicated that Mexico will continue to be the primary intermediary country in the future, from where Mexican criminal organizations will be able to continue to supply the North American continent with coca-based drugs through their well-established smuggling networks. In the northern half of the Americas, cocaine availability remains high and widespread. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, 2.1% of the population in the United States and Canada will be cocaine users by 2023. By way of comparison, the global estimate is 0.4%, and by region the figures are the following. Oceania is 2.7%, Western and Central Europe 1.4%, South America 0.1%. Between 2012 and 2018, the number of deaths from cocaine-related drug poisoning increased every year, and 2018 was the third consecutive year that the number of such deaths has exceeded 10,000 cases. Much of the cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl smuggled into the country continues to be supplied by Mexican transnational criminal organizations, while at the local level, violent street gangs dominate the retail sale and distribution of these illicit drugs. The primary entry points for cocaine into North America are the states along the southern US-Mexico border. It is in these southern stretches that cooperation between Mexican drug traffickers and US gangs first developed. Cross-border family ties, knowledge of language, customs, and culture helped the US gangs to develop their links with the Mexican cartels. These cooperating gangs are, in most cases, of the same ethnicity and language as their cross-border partners, but are largely US citizens. Initially, before the outbreak of the drug war in 2006, US criminal gangs bought drugs from wholesalers, mainly for street-level distribution. Later, criminal organizations operating north of the border were also involved in the logistics, mainly by facilitating smuggling, guarding drug shipments, and ensuring the return of large shipments of cash to Mexico. Over time, these American gangs, by then working closely with the cartels, also took on a role as enforcers. The purpose of these tasks was to crack down on those belonging to the Mexican cartels, to oust US gangs dealing with rival cartels, and to protect the territory. Mexican drug trafficking criminal organizations are specifically looking for partners in the United States who are like-minded, building their underworld organizations. One of the most important aspects is the stability of the organizational structure. Internal tensions, war within gangs can bring instability to the supply chain. Second criterion is loyalty. US organizations must be loyal to the partnership with the cartels, and gang members must be loyal to the organizations. This loyalty system ensures that they do not cooperate with law enforcement, which would seriously jeopardize the drug trade, and do not form new partnerships with other rival Mexican cartels. The third criterion is discipline. A reckless act by a gang member could bring the criminal organization to the attention of drug law enforcement or destroy the gang from within. The figure shows the influence of the most prominent transnational cartels in the United States. The figure clearly shows that the most influential transnational criminal organization in the US is the Sinaloa Cartel, followed by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. The amount of cocaine entering Europe has increased significantly in recent years, as evidenced by record seizures. Over the past decades, since around the late 1990s, Latin American criminal organizations have steadily increased their supply to European markets, driven by increased demand and higher profits. Similarly, the North American market. Europe is considered to be one of the largest cocaine markets in the world. For transnational cartels, Europe has become a much more attractive target area as the profits are much higher and the risks are lower. In some Western European countries, a kilogram of pure cocaine can cost up to $80,000 compared to an average of only $28,000 in the US. According to a Europol document, more criminal networks are involved in cocaine trafficking than in any other crime. Cocaine shipments to the European Union are mainly transported by ship, as the biggest obstacle for smugglers is the Atlantic crossing. But shipments to southern Europe, especially Spain and Italy, are also often transported by air, using the Atlantic archipelago, such as the Canary Islands and Cape Verde, as a refueling spot. In addition to all these transport methods, Insight Crime 2021 also reports cases where Spanish authorities seized a narco-submarine in 2019. Although the use of submarines in the drug trade was reported years ago, this was the first time such a vessel had been seized off the coast of Europe. 3 tons of cocaine were discovered on board the submarine, which could fetch up to $90 million on European markets. The main points of departure for cocaine arrival in Europe are ports in Colombia, Brazil, and Ecuador. Spain has been the main entry point for smuggling into the European Union since the 1980s because of linguistic and cultural similarities. But this has now changed, and the focus has shifted to Benelux countries. The ports of the northern Germany are in particular important for cocaine traffic because they have the best developed infrastructure network in Europe, which is key to ensuring rapid removal and unloading. Drug traffickers, like illegal businesses, are striving for efficiency. European law enforcement agencies have responded to this change, and the seizures of illicit drugs have rapidly increased, leading to importers using new, less controlled secondary ports. Drug traffickers transport large quantities of cocaine to Europe via West Africa and North Africa, both by air and land. The use of these routes has been volatile over the past 20 years, but may be on the rise again due to illegal migration. In Europe, there is a sharp divide between East and West in terms of the number of users. While in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, according to the UN document, there are 580,000 users, representing 0.26% of the population, and in Western and Central Europe, there are approximately 4,430,000 users, representing 1.39% of the region's population. In North America, by comparison, this figure reaches 6,880,000, representing 2.12% of the total population. The data show that this sharp divide in consumption is not due to geographical distance, but to the population's ability to afford the high price of cocaine, as traffickers target countries where they can make the highest possible profit. Record drug flows are generating billions of euros for European criminal networks that have become a mainstay of old and new mafia groups. The power of both Latin American and European criminal networks has grown immeasurably since there are significant differences in the levels of cocaine use between the continent's nation-states. The problems and experiences of cocaine use vary widely. Within the European Union, cocaine trafficking affects almost all member states. After arriving in the ports mentioned before, the drugs are usually transported by land in cars and trucks, in which the narcotic is transported in hidden compartments. Commercial flights, light aircraft, helicopters, railways, and even the postal service are used for further distribution. These means of transport are used to return cash from sales. The cocaine trade is shaped by the individuals, groups, and organizations involved. Criminal organizations are well organized and operate according to a strict hierarchy. Among the major players in the European cocaine market, mention should be made of the Italian mafia networks, notably the Camorra in Naples, the 'Ndrangheta in Calabria, and the Cosa Nostra in Sicily. These criminal organizations maintain a wide network of contacts in South America, with both producers and suppliers, coordinating their business through local contacts. In many cases, the Italian mafias finance their South American partners. In the words of Inside Crime, Italian mafias, but especially the 'Ndrangheta, paddle upstream to the source of cocaine, while South American criminal organizations paddle downstream to Europe. In many cases, the mafias use legitimate businesses to traffic drugs, further complicating the work of law enforcement. The organization of the Italian mafia and its early collaboration with transnational criminal organizations in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and Venezuela did not monopolize European markets. As a result, a number of enterprising criminal groups, notably gangs based in the countries of the former Yugoslav republics, sought to participate. At a higher level, we can mention the Serbian-Montenegrin Darko Saric network, the Bosnian Tito and Dino cartel, or the Serbian Grupa America. Experience from the past year shows that the main direction of movement of drugs from Latin America is still the reachable and more proximate USA and Canada, where large amounts of demand are readily available. However, cocaine, among the many drugs, has such a special monopoly position that even in the European drug markets, cocaine, as only drug of South America, origin floods the night streets, while other drugs are produced locally or in the surrounding regions in the old continent. In North America, the Mexican cartels have an almost unique monopoly. These criminal organizations are considered the main sources of methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl smuggled into the US and Canada. Although the main centers of cocaine cultivation and production are in the Andean region, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, Mexican gangs transport cocaine to the United States through logistical networks. Thanks to their network of contacts, their well-established smuggling network, the presence of related Latinos in the US, and their long-standing cooperation with local gangs, they are able to generate billions of dollars in profits from drug trafficking every year. The only drug that has shown a sharp decline in volumes from Mexico is cannabis. This is mainly due to the explosion of legalization in the US over the last few years, which has partly driven down imports from Mexico, partly due to legal production at home and partly to increased quality caused by competition in the market. While cartels in South America and Mexico are the most prominent in the New World in terms of drug trafficking, local criminal organizations are taking center stage on the European continent. Given the data, it is not surprising that while criminal networks that have been smuggling drugs into the US and Canada for decades are able to supply large quantities of many types of drugs quickly, cheaply, and easily, only South American cocaine is able to find a market in Europe. Cocaine is unique among drugs in that its global production is almost entirely confined to South America. For this reason, Latin American criminal organizations such as Mexican criminal organizations are inevitably involved in the distribution of the drug even across the ocean. The criminal groups have quickly realized the advantages of the European market, a business which they carry out in conjunction with local criminal organizations, gangs, and mafias, which may have a history going back more than a century. The cultivation, production, and manufacture of other narcotics do not require a particular climate or environment, so they are mainly sourced and distributed through domestic production, or at least through producers closer to the region, as they are cheaper, safer, and more controlled in the process for the illicit traffickers.